Next, we have asked Nick Countryman, who is a market analyst for TNS Global, who has a lot of experience with Amazon and is an expert on leadership decision making. He will be doing an e-interview for us, and he is going to talk about a recent business venture that Amazon chose to pursue and how Jeff's decision making tendencies affected this venture.
Hi there, 60 Minutes viewers. My name is Nick Countryman, and I was asked to come in or do an e-interview and talk a little bit about the decision making at Amazon. And so I think one of the most important things to realize before we start talking specifically about some of the decisions is that CEO and founder Jeff Bezos really plays a big part in the decision making at Amazon. And this is just kind of important to understand because he really kind of spearheads a lot of the different developments and projects that the company does. And so with this in mind, I think it's important to understand this quote that I have from him, that he prefers to invest heavily in the future, what might drive business tomorrow, rather than reap the benefits of today. And so this is really important in understanding the culture of Amazon and the decision making, because they're not trying to make profit today, they're trying to create something that's going to build business for the future. And so specifically what I want to talk about a lot is the creation of the Amazon Fire Phone. It was a project that started in 2010 and was released in the summer of 2014. And I think this will really give a lot of hints as to how decisions are made within the company and what might have gone well and what might have not gone so well when they decided to produce this phone. And so what I'm going to do is apply it to something called the Z decision making, the Z problem solving model, which is based off of the Myers-Briggs type indicator test. So it has to do a lot with personality types. And so as we'll see, Jeff Bezos does a little better job of some steps than others because of his personality traits. So let's get into the different steps of the model and see how decisions are made at Amazon. All right, so the first step to the Z model is actually called the sensing model. And this is really the process where you look at kind of all the facts and evidence that you can around a decision to kind of make, to get a better idea of what the decision should be, what you should decide. So when we're talking about Amazon specifically, one of the first things they really realized, and one of the kind of the reasons that they started to think about creating a phone was because of the fact that Amazon products, when sold online, they make very little profit off them in the first place. And if you sell them through a phone, like a phone through, like if you buy something online through like the App Store for Apple or something like that, Apple charges the companies that sell products through the App Store a pretty large amount, to the point where Amazon actually can't sell a lot of their products and don't offer their store on smartphones because of the fact that the margins they're losing on there actually reduce any profit that they can make. So that was really the first thing they realized. And then after kind of looking at that, they kind of realized that there was also room for market share in the phone market. There's in an interview with New York Times, Bezos explains that if we go back in time just 5, 6, or 7 years ago, we're talking about different players, Nokia, BlackBerry, and others. Things change very rapidly in this area. And I think this is really a lot of what Bezos was thinking when he kind of came up with the phone project, and what a lot of people were on board with was there's room for a new phone to enter the market. And that was something that they could capitalize on, and that's something that they've done with other areas of the market. And I think really the final thing that they looked at was the fact that if they were going to create a phone, they needed to make it really competitive and needed to kind of set something different about it than other phones. And so the way that they did this is Bezos has his employees write up like 2-page summaries or their fake press releases of what the phone would be about, to kind of help narrow down the ideas for what the phone would do. So in this stage, they kind of took all the facts that they could to get started on the whole project. All right, so the second step of the Z model is called the intuiting step. And it's kind of the opposite, or I guess it builds off of the first step, because you have two types of people. There's intuitors from this step, and then there's also sensors. And so somebody who's an intuitor, different than a sensor, kind of takes the different facts that they found and thinks a little more out of the box about them and tries to come up with kind of different new solutions. And so this is really something that Jeff Bezos is well known for at Amazon, because he kind of thinks differently than most people, and he thinks of kind of optimal solutions to everyday problems. And so this is where he had a lot of influence on the project, because this is his strength, and the phone was really his idea. So when we're talking specifically about the phone, what you find is that they came up with all these different solutions, these different ideas, and they decided that they needed something to set the phone apart. So they came up with something called the dynamic perspective. And so essentially the dynamic perspective is an aspect of the phone where there's 4 cameras on each corner of the phone, and all the 4 cameras constantly are monitoring where the user's face is and their perspective on the phone, so that you can look at the image on the screen and it appears as 3D because it moves along with you. And so it's a really cool aspect of the phone, and they really believe when they came up with this idea that it was going to be kind of like the Siri of the iPhone. It was kind of the deal breaker, the thing that kind of wowed people and got them going to the store. It was the blockbuster. And so they really believed that this was going to be the thing that set it apart, and Jeff was extremely kind of excited by this idea, almost to the point where they didn't come up with enough other solutions. They started making shortcuts, something called a heuristic, to essentially accomplish this goal, even at the expense of other necessary things. And so it's often that when the phone came out, and still now, users kind of complain because they think that the display of the phone is kind of overly basic, outside of the 3D model thing, and so it wasn't as useful as it was just kind of interesting. And so they made some shortcuts, they made some heuristics to make the dynamic perspective happen, but they didn't essentially get the other things that needed to be done as well. So they didn't really look at all the facts and apply them all. They got kind of stuck on one fact, and that was they needed a wow factor. Okay, so the third step in the Z model is called the thinking step. And so this stage is really kind of all about objectivity and understanding. Essentially, it asks the question, if I wasn't involved in this decision-making process, how would things be different? And I think this is kind of the most telling stage for what went wrong with the development of the Fire Phone, because of the fact that so much of the phone was dedicated to what Jeff thought should be right and not enough about the customer. There's actually a quote from an inside source that says, in essence, we were not building the phone for the customer, we were building it for Jeff. And so really what you see is that they were so focused on doing especially the dynamic perspective aspect of the phone, they were so dedicated to doing what he wanted that they kind of failed to address some of the other things that are kind of necessary in a phone to make it a successful one, and they really kind of messed up in that aspect. I think really kind of the best way to explain what happened with them is the term an escalation of commitment. And so this is where essentially a company gets themselves too deep into a decision to kind of pull back. And I think a lot of ways this is what happened with dynamic perspective. Jeff was so excited and dedicated to the idea, that nobody was willing to tell him that, like, you know what, it's really not that useful of an idea for a phone. It's just really something that's cool. But they had spent so much time and effort and money, and they were on a deadline, and I think that they really kind of just went along with the idea without fighting back, without doing what essentially he wants from the company, which is an argument, a reasonable justification for what they're doing. And the fact that they kind of failed to think about this and only thought about his opinion is really what caused problems for the phone. And I think that the thinking stage really shows how much objectivity is necessary in a decision like this. Okay, so the fourth and final step of the Z decision-making model is called the feeling step. And so the feeling step is really kind of, once you've looked back on all the other steps, you think about how the decisions you're going to make or that you have made are going to affect people around you. How does that make other people feel? How does it make yourself feel? And so when we apply this to the Fire Phone, I really think that one of the first ideas they came up with, which I talked about earlier, the idea of creating kind of an ease of use for other Amazon products is something that really would make customers feel something different about the company, and feel this bigger connection. So I think in a lot of senses, the creation of the Fire Phone just in general really appealed to this step of feeling. However, when you look at other aspects of the decision process, you don't get kind of that same feeling. You can kind of see that there were some parts where they kind of messed up in considering other people's feelings, especially the customers. As I mentioned, the phone was kind of designed for Jeff. It became like more of a this is Jeff's thing. And so they failed to kind of consider the types of people that are Amazon customers, because really Amazon generates so many sales and has so much success because of the fact that they really offer great deals to their customers, and they bring products at a very rapid pace, and it's a very convenient, good deal. I mean, they have like free shipping, that kind of stuff is kind of something that's always been identified with Amazon. However, when you think of the Fire Phone, especially the dynamic perspective aspect, this is a very expensive kind of high technology piece of a phone, and it's not so much of a good deal. So when they decided to make a phone like this and decided that it was going to be expensive and try to compete with a company like Apple, where customers identify with Apple not so much based on price, but based on kind of the new and crazy ideas. Whereas with somebody who's buying from Amazon, it's much more of a utility kind of buy. And so they really kind of failed to consider the feelings of their customers when it came to the phone as a whole. And really, like I said, it kind of all started with this idea of the dynamic perspective, because they were making such shortcuts with everything else just to create this one idea that they thought would set it apart. And so really when you boil it all down, if they had considered the feelings of the customers a little more, and how they identify Amazon, I think they would have done a lot better in creating a phone that fits their customers. So overall, I really think that the Z problem-solving model helps a lot with understanding the decision process for the Fire Phone and gives a better idea of how Jeff makes his decisions. And so it's very clear that, as I explained in some of the earlier steps, he considered a lot of different ideas, but really what happened is he got stuck on one specific idea. And so it really, each step kind of exposes what's good and what's bad about the whole process that they made. And this kind of alludes to how Jeff works in different aspects of the company as well. But really, when we're talking about the Fire Phone, I think it's important to understand that this is something that they're going to continue to develop. They plan on continuing developing, and I think that it does have a lot of potential to be successful. However, I just really think that if they sat down and tried to understand the different aspects of this decision-making model or other decision-making models, where they make sure to consider a lot of different ideas, I think that they would kind of do a little bit better in continuing to develop this phone, because they think so much about their customers and not what Jeff would want if it was him making the phone. And so really, I think that as long as they can kind of consider more subjectively about what their customers want, I think they'll be able to generate sales. But if they're going to try to sell a top shelf phone right now in such a competitive market, they're going to get themselves into kind of an escalation of commitment if they don't kind of change their strategy a little bit. So I think Amazon's doing a good job. I think Jeff Bezos is an absolute genius, and he's doing a great job for Amazon. But I just wanted to make sure that they realize that these kind of models can really help explore how it is you could better make decisions.